In 2006, only 6 months after starting here at Globant, I submitted my resignation. I had made up my mind after a bad experience in my first project. 16 years have gone by, and obviously, I'm still here. I wonder many times what made me change my mind after that conversation in which I told my boss I had decided to quit. And after giving it a lot of thought, I think it was the fact that it was a meaningful conversation. Today, I will tell you how a conversation can change the course of your life. I would like to share with you my experience with meaningful conversations, particularly to go over what we must bear in mind and how to approach different types of meetings. And of course, what is really at stake when dealing with conflictive situations. I hope that this talk will leave you with concrete tools to improve your performance and that of your team. A meaningful conversation is about being present in the moment and saying what you have to say assertively, yet being connected to the person in front of you and knowing what is going on with them. The day I submitted my resignation, I was carrying a heavy emotional burden. I had traveled to London as a project manager with no experience in the position, and I was new in the company. And as fun as it sounds being in London, I had been feeling lonely throughout the entire project. During that conversation, my leader sitting in front of me did not speak about the project. He didn't speculate with future changes, nor he mentioned financial compensations. The only thing I remember from that conversation is that he listened. And after a moment of silence, he said, "That's a shame. Many people here appreciate you." That statement caught me off guard because he didn't try to justify things, but instead he focused on the reasons for my decision. Suddenly, I realized I wasn't alone, that many people were following what I did closely. My point is that if you are going to have a conversation with someone, it's wise to understand context. The second important aspect is to be prepared for multiple points of view to arise. This conversation showed me something I wasn't seeing. It opened up a perspective I hadn't considered before. There was an important connection in that meeting, and we communicated with real honesty. I never forget that behind a collaborator, a peer, a member of a team, there is always a personal context that may be conditioning their work. That's why a meaningful conversation can be a turning point in a Glober's journey. It can change their presence and growth in the company. I can attest to that. A meaningful conversation can happen in any given meeting. I'd like to share a few tips that I use in 2 specific types of meetings and the difference between them. Let's start with one-on-one meetings. We must understand that a meaningful conversation is not an isolated event. I like to consider them as part of a series of conversations. For example, maybe one day someone comes to you and shares their need to grow within the company. And so you will have this first conversation where you will mostly listen in order to understand their mindset and feelings. Maybe this will require a second meeting to be able to give a sincere, adequate response to their initial concern. And here's another word I like: commitment. Once you've listened, you must commit to providing a response in order to ensure continuity, because many things happen to the other person in the time between conversations. For example, in the story I told you, I didn't even consider checking whether I had access to my leader in between conversations, and I kept accumulating things. With a more open channel, maybe I could have clarified things sooner. This is why for me perseverance is so important. I am all for scheduling regular meetings with my team members, and I think it's crucial to have an open agenda, and even if meetings need to be moved around, there must always be an open channel. There are key moments in which relationships are established. For example, I'd like to know what you're up to, what you need. It's not enough to have a progress report on the project. I need to know how you feel about the things you're dealing with. It is not a one-way street. In this sense, my recommendation is try not to reschedule a meeting more than twice, because I think that the person involved may feel like there's no room in your schedule for them, and it creates a negative predisposition. This is why it's important to take some time to make sure that a meeting actually takes place. With that gesture, you're always giving importance to the conversation you will eventually have. How you frame the conversation is also important, being clear throughout the meeting. If you're having a one-on-one meeting with your usual setting and that collaborator refers to a conflict that took place at another time, and you're giving them feedback on this, be clear. Open a parenthesis, be specific, and convey that feedback. Then return to the informal conversation. To conclude, bear in mind that not all conversations need to focus on work. It's important to know what the other person is going through. Back to my personal story, I would like to highlight that the only thing I remember from that conversation is that I felt supported. I felt I wasn't alone in the process. We did not talk about work. We talked about feelings, but without delving too much into it. Even a salary-related conversation can be meaningful, because it's not just about a raise, a percentage. It's about the projects the other person will be able to materialize with that money. Activities with our kids, plans, vacations. One-on-one meetings allow you to strengthen interpersonal bonds and better understand the Glober's motivation and aspirations. Now, let's talk about feedback meetings. My first advice is to not let your mood affect your approach when preparing feedback for a collaborator. For example, if you're having a bad day, we may become more severe. And on the contrary, when we are in a very good mood, we may let a few things slip. We are human. But giving feedback with an incorrect assessment may have a negative impact. So my advice here is to sleep on it and resume the thinking the next day to check whether we are being conditioned by our state of mind. Another important point is how to approach the conversation from the minute one. This may sound cliché, but starting a conversation with "you did this wrong" or "you weren't useful here" really sets a negative tone and is usually counterproductive. Any of these statements will trigger dozens of thoughts in the person sitting in front of you, and they will withdraw from the purpose of your conversation. They will immediately assume you're letting them go, that they need to update their resume and start knocking on doors. And that's why the key concept is to get them open to feedback. How? Start with an introduction. State the things they did, such as the projects they were involved in. Show them that you've been following the process. Highlight accomplishment, and if you can, look for data to back up these achievements. That's the most objective feedback you can give. Based on that, start identifying the areas with room for improvement. Those processes that didn't work so well and could get better with some training. Engage in constructive criticism. I like to differentiate between focus and improvement. I use the term areas of focus when the person has shown solid performance, but there are areas with some issues, or when a new project is coming up and they will have to do new things they were not doing, but still they are crucial to the success on the task. On the other hand, if the collaborator has a weak performance, I talk about improvement. And I try to support my feedback with the different options to make that change real. To conclude, show them a possible road ahead, because ultimately your goal is to improve the performance of your team. Meetings can also be tense when you know beforehand that they will be conflicting, especially when you're giving feedback that differs from the other person's opinion. You will need a few tips for this type of situations, right? I know we are all nodding your head, yes. Let's try with some practical exercises. First tip is to write down the facts. If you're dealing with a difficult situation based on facts, write them down. Reflect upon this text and consider whether this way to describe these facts is as true to you as it will be for the other person. Let's try with an example on this. Someone in your team has been in the same position and seniority for quite a while, and you want to address this with them. It would not be the same to say, "I see you are not interested in growing your career at Globant," than, "I've noticed you haven't joined Career Growth Session. What are your expectations regarding growth at Globant?" I think each of these sentences will trigger very different emotions on the other party. The second tip is even easier and quicker, and it doesn't require any intellectual effort. It's just breathing. Try taking 3 deep breaths. During the first breath, connect with the silence and the process of breathing, air flowing in and air flowing out. The second breath, connect with your body and your physical sensations. And the third breath, ask yourself, what is important for you right now? Right at that moment. Don't judge, just observe what's coming out. The third tip is probably the hardest one, and it's about being present. Give the conversation the time it deserves. Do not give feedback if you're not present in the moment. If you want your team to perform better, take time for these meetings and discuss what they are doing, but also how they feel about what they are doing. That's the key. And if you are giving feedback remotely, do it with your camera on and not on your way to the airport or walking on the street. Your team will value the kind of attention you pay them. Finally, there are different scenarios in which meaningful conversations are important. But no matter the format, the main thing is to feel that the two parties involved appreciate the fact that the conversation is actually taking place. If not, it's no longer meaningful. Like when I submitted my resignation and felt that my leader was really present in the conversation. I thanked him not only because this was a turning point for me in the company, but also because from that moment on, I understood the importance of having meaningful conversations. I hope you enjoyed this session. I connected with some personal experiences and also work-related aspects of my life in an attempt to share more information on the dynamics of meaningful conversations. Thank you.